Welcome to the Selling in the Motor Trade podcast, in association with Simco Training. This is the weekly podcast where we share best practice, tips and ideas on how to sell more cars, improve your service department, and generally put more profit into your dealership or dealer group. I'm your host, Simon Bowkett. Now, some of you probably already know me as Skippy. I will start by saying thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Hi, welcome to another episode of Selling the Motor Trade. Today it is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Graeme Potts. Now, for the few of you who've never heard about Graeme Potts, and maybe the other countries, Graeme Potts is the Chief Executive Officer of Eden Automotive Investments Limited. But that's not the whole story about Graeme. Graeme's been in the industry on lots of different levels for many, many years. Welcome aboard, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're more than welcome. It's a great pleasure. Thank you for asking me, Simon.
So can I just want to find out a little bit about yourself to start with, okay? For those who may not they know of Eden, the business, but they might not know you personally. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you first got started in the motor trade? Because I believe it was Marks and Spencer's to start with. Is that right?
It was. That's absolutely right. Yes. As you will tell from my dulcet tones, I'm from the northeast of England originally, from a very small village midway between Sunderland and Durham City. That puts me as a Sunderland fan, that for those that are interested, red and white rather than black and white. And I'm from a very ordinary family, very loving family. My father was a clerk. My mother worked in a shop. And I always wanted to get into the world of commerce. And as you've just indicated, I went to a polytechnic and got a degree in economics, not a very good one. I didn't work very hard. and I wanted to get into the world of commerce. And it was either be a very, very poorly paid article clerk or join a business. And I was lucky enough to be selected to join Marks and Spencer. And it got me into retail. And the rest of my commercial life has been as a result of getting into retail.
Is it Marks and Spencer's where the phrase "retail is in the detail" first come from? Have I got that right, or is that a generic retail?
It's an expression, but I don't know whether it emanated from M&S. But certainly, one of the things that, as an aspirant manager in M&S, you are taught very early is know your numbers.
Okay. Know your numbers. It's the detail there. Is there anything else you learned from the early days at Marks and Spencer's, which is as relevant in the motor trade as it was in that retail environment?
Yeah, when I mean, as will be revealed, it's a long, long time ago that I started my working life and left Marks and Spencer. But when I left Marks and Spencer, I had become convinced that I was at heart a retailer. I loved the unpredictability day by day, the variability of types of customer and colleagues that you work with. And of course, that washes over into any form of retail and is very much a characteristic of motor retail as well. The other thing that is massively relevant and has been a byword of my career was this thing about knowing the detail of whether it be sales, stock, revenue, turnover, knowing KPIs and data about your business. I coined an expression once I'd learned what I was doing. It's numbers that give you the language that tells you about your business.
It's so true. Even a car salesperson will walk into a business and say, how's the month shaping up for you? What have you achieved? And when I get a salesperson having to dive for a board to have a look to see where they're up to, where don't the top performers know that I've actually done 18 so far for the month at the moment, my profit's a bit low. They just know the number. And I suppose for me, it's like a game of cricket without keeping score. What's the point? So you're right about the numbers. It separates the good from the great, doesn't it? I think.
It does.
Yeah.
It does indeed.
So
personality and character are important. Numbers are vital.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So what was about the motor trade that grabbed you away from Marks and Spencer's then?
Well, there were two things, Simon. The first one was that whilst I loved retail and thoroughly enjoyed my coaching and development in M&S, in multi-outlet national companies, local management have no control over pricing, or whether that be the acquisition price or the selling price. And therefore, there is no real knowledge of profit and loss, no P&L responsibility. And I wanted that. I loved the merchanting, I loved the selling, but I wanted P&L responsibility. And at the same time, a very good friend of mine, 10, 11 years older than me, who I knew through church and choir, was taking part of a family business independent and wanted to grow it quite quickly, and asked me whether I'd consider joining him because he considered me to be a retailer and him to be a salesman.
Okay. And that was the into the motor trade then?
Yes, and that was now Sir Peter Vardy.
I mean, what a legend of a name as well. Absolutely. So hence Reg Vardy's, and starting with him right at the beginning. Can I ask a cheeky question? How many years ago was that you started with Sir Peter Vardy?
That was in 1983, so that was 43 years ago.
Wow, incredible! And what again another legend of a man. And look at the
absolutely
what he has actually built there. Incredible. So when you started with Sir Peter, can you tell us about how you started? Did you start on the floor speaking to service customers? Were you selling cars? Do you in fact remember maybe a car that you first sold? Or
well, sort of a bit of yes to all of that, but actually I was in departmental management in Marks and Spencer, and Peter asked me to join what was at that stage a 3 dealership business, all in the same town. And he wanted me to join to be the general manager of the smallest of those 3 businesses. Peter managed one himself. There was a general manager in a second dealership, and there was a very small business. And part of me cutting my teeth, as it were, was to manage that small outlet called the Metro Centre, believe it or not, which is famous in Tyneside for the Metro Centre, the shopping mall.
Yeah.
But our business was selling Austin Metros and was called the Metro Centre. And so I decided that it would fulfill a number of aspirations, not least getting P&L responsibility and hopefully being able to grow my career commercially.
Graeme, for people who don't know Reg Vardy and what they built and before he sold out there, people listen to this in the States and Canada, Australia, and they might not know the business. How big did the Reg Vardy empire become? How many dealerships were they before they were acquired by Pendragon?
Well, I left in 1999, and at that stage there were 85 dealerships, and the turnover was around about 900 million sterling. The business was actually sold some years later, and I believe it was about 95 businesses and just over $1 billion turnover. And when I joined in 1983, the business had, you might say, 2.5 dealerships, because the Metro Centre was really tiny, and the turnover was something like £4 or £5 million.
So I'm really keen about that, for turning it from those 3 businesses into what it was before you left and what Sir Peter Vardy and yourself did. What are some of the non-negotiables that were important back then that are as important in 2026? Is it?
Well, there could be a whole load. I mean, Peter was and is an inspirational character who was a brilliant marketeer and was very innovative in finding ways of packaging the affordability of motor cars. The non-negotiables were that customers would always be attended to. The idea that somebody would walk into a business and wander around and not be spoken to, or would come in very close to the notional closing time and be told we're closing in 5 minutes, was just not on the lexicon at all. But I suppose most of all was this belief that there is always a market for cars. There are always people who are looking for motor cars, and not to excuse away absence of business. We today, this very day in my own business, we have the attitude that whilst there may be economic downturns, there might be the cup final on a given afternoon, there might be a big rugby match, it might be throwing it down with rain, there are still customers. Nobody stays at home all the time. There's never a time when there aren't any customers, and our job is to find those customers. And I think that was one of the it was a positive outlook that said there is always business to be done.
Yeah. And again, I hope that salespeople listen to this, think that, I've seen it happen too often, that when the phone rings, that's a hot customer, the email comes through, but it's the walk-in customers are almost like, wow, well, they're just looking and whatever. This is 2026. Please treat every single, and it still happens, and it frustrates me that a person's not going to jump in the car, drive to one of your Mazda businesses, your Hyundai business, because they're bored. They're not going to do that.
Absolutely. Can I give you an illustration, Simon?
Yeah.
In our business in Eden, we don't lock cars in the showroom. If a car is sold and awaiting delivery, that it may be locked. But I encourage families to come into our business. And if youngsters want to sit in the cars, and even if they want to climb on the seats, we're professionals. We can clean the seats if they were to get a little bit dirty. Today's children are tomorrow's customers. We ban the expression time wasters and tyre kickers, which the motor trade used to use a lot. Because, as you rightly say, people don't waste their time. They take, even if they're visiting and not intending to purchase, they take on board the atmosphere of the business they've come into. They take on board the brightness and the loveliness of the cars. They take on board the fact that they're offered a cup of tea and coffee. They may not be buying today, but everybody is a buyer someday.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's the prejudging the people. And I get a salesperson that says the phone, it's going to be the hottest customer because they're ringing. Please don't assume that someone walking in is not going to be hot. It just doesn't happen. And the other thing, a digital inquiry, where that's our first contact nowadays, when the customer doesn't give their phone number or a false phone number, that's an opportunity to let them know we're not like other people. Okay, still reach out to them as quick as you can there, because that's the person will be ignored in every other email that is sent out.
Well, I know you're talking about my history, but bringing it bang up to date, frankly, because digital inquiry is now de rigueur for almost everybody, well over 90% of customers start their journey in a digital space, then actual walk-in traffic, first time, as we call it, first time walk-in customers are fewer than used to be. So woe betide any sales consultant who doesn't take a walk-in inquiry, walk-in visitor seriously.
Yeah. It still happens. But you're dead right. So I'm keen to talk about Sir Peter then, okay? And I'm going to say he might be a mentor for you to start in the motor trade. I'm sure you have mentors and Marks and Spencers as well. But what really stood out? Is there anything he taught you that do you still say to yourself, what would Sir Peter do now? How would, or some other person do? Do you still look back?
Yeah. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I haven't had lots of jobs, but I have, through my direct employment and through some sort of consulting and non-executive jobs, I've been fortunate to work with and for some very, very able people. Peter, his abiding characteristic was there is always a way to advertise to attract customers and help them to get into a motor car. Not a negative thought in his head. There is always a way. And in that regard, I think I have always been a fairly positive thinking person. But in that regard, very, very much reinforcing the fact that you can't overcome fundamental circumstances. But unless you're a mega global company, the scale of your operation is going to mean you can find a market.
Yeah, yeah, good. It's so true. So CEO of Reg Vardy. Okay, then it's time with I believe RAC first, and then Inchcape.
Yes, yes, yes.
And the move from RAC then to Inchcape. Can you just talk me through the leaving Reg Vardy's and what RAC maybe taught you, and then why Inchcape?
Yeah, well, I was. It was a very, very big and it was sort of painful to leave Reg Vardy. Some people would say I was more Vardy than Vardy because I'd been Peter, great, talented individual, but he had a very, very sharp focus on selling motor cars. And as the company grew, I was pleased and to a certain extent sometimes slightly pressurized into handling things that I'd never done before because we were a growth company. And it gave me a very broad experience. And with that, I suppose it opened up some opportunities. And I was approached a few times by other retailers, but didn't want to go to anywhere else. But when the approach came from RAC, or from the parent company that bought RAC, there was a particular appeal. And I was always, in one sense, going to be slightly the number two to Peter, and we got on extremely well. But I had the chance to take on a business that had been privatized from its members with a very, very big price tag. If I remember rightly, something like £765 million. So it was transformative in the scale of the business that I was going to be leading. 10,000 people, a national brand, and it was underperforming. And so whilst
I can see the excitement. I'm sorry, I cut you off there, but I can see the excitement right in your eyes just then saying, well, look, 10,000 people underperforming. I've got to get in here and fix it. You still have that passion.
Yeah. Some people would say it was a bit masochistic, but it really rang the bell that if anything was going to drag me away, a national brand, a very big business, and one that needed a financial turnaround was what drew me away.
Yeah. Okay. And then from Inchcape, so RAC back into Inchcape then, and I want to explore now because you've always working for someone else. Okay, you decide to build something of your own then. Now I understand it's a joint venture with Vauxhall. Is it right, in 2008? I believe it is.
Yes.
That's a big step, surely, from taking on those two roles to take on. How many dealerships was it to start with?
5.
Wow. Okay, so going for those 10,000 people at RAC, how many people at Inchcape? Did it almost feel like going back to Reg Vardy's again, the 3 dealerships almost?
Well, after a fashion, I can explain it. And I don't wish to preach. I certainly won't do that. But as a Christian, I do believe that there's an element of planning, honouring God, etc., etc. And I felt it was the right thing to do to, about the age of 50, leave the PLC world. And I had been pretty well rewarded and was able to take some choices. And I thought I would do a number of advisory jobs, non-executive directorships. And in fact, I started to do that. But I hadn't had a lifelong aspiration to have my own business. I was very happy and very loyal working in larger organizations. And so when Inchcape decided that certain of their UK businesses, after I'd left, were classified as non-core, amongst them being this small group of Vauxhall dealerships, it was the then MD of Vauxhall who rang me up and said, they want to dispose of these. How do you fancy going into joint venture and us taking them on? And I was actually in America at the time, having a holiday, which doesn't happen very often. And I thought, that does appeal. And the driver wasn't personal wealth, although clearly a business needs to be profitable to exist. And I'm not suggesting I want to do something for nothing, but it was more an opportunity to put into practice the people and the retailing principles that I had learned, felt, imbibed, whichever way you want to describe it, over many years. And I felt that it was the right thing to do. Now, in terms of scale, I was responsible for 1.6 billion of turnover in Inchcape, and this was a 65 million turnover business. And yeah, it wasn't a toy. It wasn't to play with. It was to have the opportunity to truly put into practice in an unadulterated way those principles that I thought made a good business.
So can I ask about the scale? Someone like Inchcape with that size of business, with the scale, it must help in so many different ways. As in, you've got your own legal teams, your own marketing departments, so forth. You've got your own training. Can you talk me through? Or am I being naive there? Is a car dealership just a car dealership, and they've got the same things?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. You've actually hit a nail right on the head in terms of one of the things that was the biggest shock, stroke, the biggest thing that had to be sorted out. And there's a slight humour here, because when I was running Inchcape's UK and European division, I was very much in favour of a great deal of centralisation. When I first went there, Inchcape UK in particular was quite fragmented. So HR, legal, property, purchasing, all those things were centralised. So when we took 5 dealerships out of Inchcape, all the infrastructure stayed with Inchcape. No IT department, no HR, no finance, no purchasing. And so
Mr. Potts
we had the businesses.
All of those departments in one fell swoop.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What pressure does that cause? My mind is boggling at the moment. How do you fund that with 5, I'm guessing, underperforming businesses?
Well, there's another perversity there, if you don't mind me saying. When I went into Inchcape, the Inchcape UK retail business was very underperforming, and we as a team managed to turn it around. So actually, by the time I acquired these 5 businesses, they were profitable.
Okay.
They weren't hugely profitable, but they were profitable. So actually, we had to pay a pretty decent price for them because they were profitable. I beg your pardon. But be that as it may, we went in with our eyes open, but the fact is that we did have to build an infrastructure. And how we did it in the first instance was to outsource, because we were small. I inherited, as one of the general managers, Nikki, who was a former accountant, who was quite obvious was very talented in financial senior management, and she became our financial controller, subsequently finance director. So we very soon had a very capable senior finance resource, but being small and clearly pretty heavily indebted in day one, we went and outsourced HR, we outsourced IT, we outsourced telephony, and purchasing and things like that. And I used a former colleague who retired as a consultant to help us with things like purchasing garage equipment. And in retrospect, obviously it's quite a few years back now, it worked extremely well, but it was jolly hard work.
Well, I spoke to John O'Hanlon on the podcast, and again, built a brilliant business. And he said the economies of scale still works. And he was talking, I asked him a question. For someone listening to this, maybe they're a head of business somewhere or a general manager, dealer principal, they want to row their own boat. Is there still an opportunity for that? And I don't know if I worded it correctly with him. He said, yes, of course there's an opportunity, but does a single standalone dealership, be it a single Mazda, Kia, whatever it is, can they stack up in 2026? Or do you need more of to help with that economies of scale?
Yeah, it would be a brave person and probably a foolish person to say definitely no, but it is very, very challenging, because whilst there aren't economies of scale in terms of purchasing vehicles from manufacturers,
yes, yeah,
because they all, in my knowledge these days, work with a level playing field. Mm-hmm. There is the economies of scale in having the liquidity to be able to buy more cars. The terms might be the same, but you can potentially buy more cars, which gives you more capacity for deals and offers and so on and so forth. The main thing is the economies of scale in leadership and infrastructure of the business. When we started with 5 dealerships, 2 large, 2 medium, 1 very small, we didn't have the money to have an HR leader. We didn't have the money to have a manager of IT. And we outsourced that. And it's possible, it's doable, but clearly that slightly puts your costs up.
Yeah.
And so as we grew, we were determined to become self-sufficient. I think, I know John very well. I think John would have exactly the same attitude of mind, which is that you get the economies to an extent, but above all, you get the ethos of the business running through the infrastructure as well as the front end of the business.
It's that culture, isn't it? The culture runs through the whole business.
Absolutely.
Speaking to the Smythes, Peter Smythe said that when they sold the RRG group, they started Swansway. The first 3 years, I think Peter, and I might be putting words into his mouth now, but he said the first 3 years it was getting the culture right. That was the hardest thing for them, to get that culture running through their business. And people would come and go because they just weren't part of it. And I'm imagining Eden now, it is your culture. This is how Eden does things.
Yeah, I'm not going to be complacent or hubristic, but one of the things that distinguishes our business, I believe, is a culture. We've had an executive leadership team that's very stable. We're not automatons. We're actually quite different characters in some ways, but the values and the ethos does run very deep. And if Peter and John have both talked about changing culture when you acquire a business, it is quite simply the most important thing, and in some ways the most difficult thing to do.
It must be. The other thing as well, though, you started with 3 with Sir Peter, okay, built it to a huge business. You've got like 10,000 people working for you, then back to these 5 businesses. What stress did that put on you personally? Where do you start doing that? I know you talk about you had to outsource everything there, but what did a typical week look like for you? You must have been working all hours.
When we started Eden, immensely wrong hours, because clearly I had an aspiration that we should trade well, and at the same time sorting out an infrastructure of outsourced services, but at the same time we're working on changing compute system and building processes that were in line with the attitudes that I wanted to bring. So it was kind of day job was helping to drive commercially, and the rest of the hours were spent on strategizing and building the business from its infrastructure upwards. And so Nikki and I worked extremely long hours. And of course, in any acquired business, there are people who fall by the wayside because they're either not capable, not to the right level of capability, or they don't like the newer world. And so you've got recruitment ongoing and coaching, and it was, I wouldn't say round the clock, but it wasn't far off. But can I
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
Simon, just in that groove of what you just mentioned, there was something that was a huge shock to me and a big learning. And I had been a divisional CEO of a multinational PLC. And when you went to a market, it was seen as a royal visit. I didn't like that, but that's the way it was seen. Into my own business. But the responsiveness from colleagues to an owner manager is a different order of magnitude to being a senior exec in a big PLC. I realized that people took my word literally. And if you've got time, I'll give you an example.
Please.
I hated, in the Reading Vauxhall business, I hated the reception desk where the host receptionist sat. It was a great big thing. It blocked her, couldn't see the customers. And I said to the local management team, I hate that. Let's just get a normal desk and put the switchboard on the desk, etc., etc. And thought no more about it until the same afternoon. I was upstairs in a meeting and I heard crash, bang, wallop, noise like there'd been as if there'd been a crash downstairs in our showroom. So I rushed downstairs to find 3 or 4 technicians, 2 or 3 sales execs, and the sales manager smashing up this great wooden desk, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, with the telephonist sitting with the switchboard on her knee, sitting on a chair, and customers wondering what's going on. And I said to the sales manager, I said, "What are you doing?" "Boss, you said you didn't want it. You wanted rid of it. I'm doing what you asked." And I said, "Yeah, I probably thought after hours we'd take one out and bring another one in.
But we're doing it now."
Yeah, that was a zany example of how somebody, not out of fear, but just responsiveness to the owner. There's a world of difference to how people interpret guidance and instructions when you're the owner as opposed to their executive boss.
There must be so many people listening to this thinking, goodness me, Graeme, how do you do that? Because I've asked people to do something similar for 16 weeks now, and they haven't done it there, but they've just done it there and then. And it wasn't a fear, you said. It was just this is...
Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 things. Reputation,
yes, of course.
People knew that I come from a very big business, and can I be honest, a blind man on a galloping horse would know that I've got high standards.
Yes,
and I wasn't shy in saying that the personal presentation, the dealership, etc., got high standards.
Yeah,
and so. There was a kind of, and I also promised that we would change the businesses and make them more successful. And I think that there was a wave of enthusiasm, shall we say, that perhaps needed tempering a little bit.
That just leaves me to say that all details of this episode and other episodes on the selling in the motor trade can be found on our website, simcotraining.co.uk. Go there to get a copy of our book, Words That Sell Cars. Go there to sign up to a free trial of our Sales Fitness online sales training program. Easiest way to get hold of me is Simon Bowkett through LinkedIn. Thank you.